Right, joining us now to analyse our GB News end-of-year poll is the political editor of HuffPost, Kevin Schofield. Good morning, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, you've seen the results of this poll, obviously. What do you make of them?
Yeah, I think it's pretty grim New Year news for Rishi Sunak. We've had 12 months now of relentless relaunches, policy initiatives, ideas spewing out of Number 10 to try and shift the political narrative, and it appears that it's not shifted the political dial 1 millimetre. So that'll be pretty depressing for the Prime Minister as we head into a general election year.
And Kev, one of the things that really leaps out of this, it's almost like no matter how you rearrange the deck chairs, it feels like perhaps the party is sinking. 66 purely believe it's time for change. Only 12% disagree. And Kev, maybe that's just symptomatic of the fact, the same with the Labour Party before them. 13 years of rule. People just want to try a different mob.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at history tells you, if you look at general elections in this country, the British electorate tend to give parties a reasonable chunk of time. You're right, they gave New Labour 13 years. They've given the Tories this time, coming up to 14 years, actually. The Conservatives before 97 got 18 years. And generally, sometimes you get to the stage where if you've been in power for such a long time, people get a bit fed up with the sight of you. Effectively, there is literally nothing you can do to change the fact that people just want to see some new people in charge. Now, it might not be that there's a great wave of optimism or support for Labour, but they benefit from the fact that they're just not the Conservatives. Now, we saw in the summer, or in the autumn rather, at the Conservative Party conference, Rishi Sunak tried to project the Conservatives as the party of change, as he's a fresh face. He'd only been Prime Minister for a few months. It looks as though that has fallen flat on its face as well. People weren't fooled by it. He might be a different face, but he's still representing the Conservative Party. And I think that is a big vote loser right now. People just want to see someone different in charge. And then, if Labour come in and it doesn't work, then they'll look to change again. But right now, I think it feels as though time is completely running out for the Conservative Party.
Kevin, the priorities, according to the survey, that people want the government to do is tackling the cost of living crisis, improving the NHS and stopping the small boats. What do you make of the order of those priorities for a start? And, do they have any chance of achieving any of them?
Well, I mean, the cost of living crisis has been number one in every single opinion poll of voters' priorities for at least a year now, probably a couple of years. And until the government shows that they can do something about that, then I don't think they've got any chance of winning in the next election at all. Now, we've obviously seen in the past they've given quite a lot of support for people's energy bills. Inflation has come down. That's one target that Rishi Sunak has managed to achieve in the past 12 months. But again, they don't seem to be getting much credit for that. Then the NHS, as we all know, is a national obsession. People love the NHS, but admit that it's not working too well. Again, if it's not working well, who are people going to blame? They're going to blame the people in charge, and that's the Conservatives. So they're not going to have any time now to try and turn it around. As I say, they've had almost 14 years. If they've not done it by now, people will think, well, you're not going to do it at all. We'll give the other guys a chance. Small boats, again, it is important, but it's not the most important thing for voters. And again, I think by drawing so much attention to it, Rishi Sunak is just basically highlighting the fact that the government has failed on that as well.
Ooh, yeah, not good news, is it, really, for Rishi? Kevin Schofield, political editor of HuffPost, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Right, and now let's get some further reaction now from foreign policy analyst and former aide to Margaret Thatcher, Nile Gardiner. Nile, always a pleasure to see you on the show. As you know, this will be music to your ears, and perhaps no surprise that when we look back for the leader people most miss, most aspire to in the current age even, top of the list, Maggie Thatcher. Why do you think that is?
Martin, great to be on the show today. And I think that Margaret Thatcher was a truly authentic, genuine politician and a true conservative. And I think there's a huge contrast between Margaret Thatcher's vision, courage and leadership with the lackluster, weak-kneed leadership you're seeing in Downing Street right now. And Margaret Thatcher was an entirely different political figure to Rishi Sunak in an entirely different league altogether. And at the end of the day, she was a big picture thinker, a big picture visionary. She was relentlessly optimistic, I think. But she really was dedicated to advancing conservative policies that benefited the British people, especially the average man or woman on the street. I do think that Rishi Sunak comes across as very much out of touch with the British public. He's alienated a lot of conservative voters. He doesn't seem to be capable of delivering upon promises. And at the end of the day, also, Sunak was responsible for ousting a very popular prime minister among conservatives, of course, Boris Johnson, who is very well liked by conservative voters. And so I think a lot of conservative voters have not forgiven Rishi for the ousting of Boris, actually.
Niall, it's interesting that Margaret Thatcher is followed in the favourite poll here by Winston Churchill and then Tony Blair. Now, the one thing you would say about all three of these is they had conviction. They had conviction and they stuck to those convictions. We don't seem, in either of our main parties, to have anyone with any conviction. I mean, you know, Keir Starmer notoriously flip-flops and Rishi Sunak seems to change his mind fairly often as well. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I do think that, of course, Winston Churchill, a massive figure on the world stage. Tony Blair, for all of his faults, was a big political leader, and there's a big contrast between Blair and Keir Starmer, who is a relentless flip-flopper, and who knows what Keir Starmer actually believes in at all. I think it was far clearer, of course, with Tony Blair. So I think that right now we have a lack of, real big picture visionary politicians in Britain. Certainly Sunak does not represent that for the Conservatives. Keir Starmer, I think, doesn't represent that for Labour. And in my view, I think a Labour government would actually be catastrophic for Britain. But you have a Conservative government that is deeply unpopular and doesn't seem to offer anything for Conservative voters actually to turn out in large numbers to support their own party. So they're in real trouble. And I think that anything short of a miraculous comeback by Boris Johnson isn't going to save the Conservatives right now.
It's interesting you brought that up, because what all of these leaders have in common for me is optimism and hope. Yeah. They sold optimism during dark times, World War II, the end of the Conservative era with Blair, and of course with Thatcher coming out of the long, cold winters of discontent. They sold hope. Boris Johnson sold hope. Get Brexit done. Hope and optimism, Niall, quickly if we could, seem to be sadly bereft from the current political landscape.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Boris Johnson, as you point out, was a relentlessly optimistic figure, and the British people rallied around him, of course, in the 2019 election and over Brexit. We don't have that kind of leadership today. There's doom and gloom in Britain. That's a big contrast, I think, to the kind of approach offered by Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill, Boris Johnson, and Rishi Sunak certainly isn't offering that. Labour offers, in my view, a catastrophic path for Britain. But Britain could be facing 5 years of socialist rule, which I think would be extremely damaging, actually, for the British people.
OK, Nile Gardiner, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us once again, and a happy new year to you, Captain. Great stuff. You know, I think that's such an important about optimism, because we don't have that in politics anymore. There isn't anyone, I mean, I was lucky enough to interview Margaret Thatcher. There isn't anyone that it's inspirational. And it's the same with Nigel Farage during that Brexit time. It was about optimism, it was hope. Yeah. Because people feel like they're not listened to, they feel downtrodden,